Alright, so welcome back to another review. I do apologize for taking this long for bringing out the newest, latest, and greatest video, but it did take me a while, and then I had the hard drive issues, so I figured, let's go for a change. Let's go for something new, exciting, and different. So here we are. Now, in the last review, I did talk about the AudioTechnica R70Xs, and they are the king of neutrality, there's no doubt about it. But how do they compare against the tried and true HD600s? I mean, they're my baby. I love them. Well, let's not waste any more time. Let's get right into it. So let's start off with the contents here. The biggest difference between the two, it's going to be the cables. So if we are talking about the OG HD600s, these are actually going to take the cake against the AudioTechnica R70Xs. And that's because the cable on these is a little longer, a little thinner, just overall nice. It just disappears. It doesn't feel like it's hanging off of you. But if we're talking about the newer HD600s, the R70Xs still definitely take the cake when it comes to that particular category. Now, when it comes to having a slightly longer cable, these just aren't going to make the cut. Sometimes I like using these on the couch. I can't do that with the latest and greatest 600s, but I can do it with these. Plain and simple. These, for the record, the cable is long enough to be able to utilize it from a pretty far distance. It's quite long. I also like it. Now, let's go ahead and jump into build quality. I think the R70Xs are going to be dead last in this category by, I don't want to say a smidge, but definitely not a landslide either. It's kind of in between. So the HD600s, as we know, at least these particular models, are tried and true, right? You got a bit of plastic, a bit of metal in there, but at the end of the day, these things have outlived children, teenagers. They've been around since the 90s. We know they last, especially if you take care of them. These, on the flip side, are newer to the market. We've yet to determine their longevity, but these particular suspension pads right here, definitely their weakest area. Now, that being said, I do have high hopes for them because they definitely don't feel cheap or flimsy or flawed in any particular way, but only time will tell. Now, as for comfort, this one's actually a bit of a toss-up. It's more about what your ear shape is like and what you personally prefer from a headphone. If you happen to have longer, larger ears, you're definitely going to want to go with the HD600s here, as they do have a more oval cup size as opposed to the circular cup size of the R70Xs. Now, me personally, I like this particular design a little better in the sense that they fit like the Sundaras. It's a small enough cup, big enough to be, you know, somewhat wide sounding. Also, they don't stick out very wide either. They fit pretty well, pretty snug. And if it weren't for a cable, depending on what cable you're using, I can wear these all day, no problems. HD600s on the flip side, they can get a little tiresome after a while. Now, the pads on mine have worn out quite a bit, which in my opinion is good. They fit a little more loose, and I do like that. They also have a relatively strong clamp force. I don't feel like they're going to fall off my head anytime soon, but yeah, I'm giving it to the R70Xs. But for me, again, I do have smaller ears though, so do keep that in mind. Now, as for amplification, on my THX AAA789, I listen to the R70Xs at around 11:30 AM on gain 2. I listen to the HD600s at around 11 on gain 2 with single-ended, and around 11 on gain 1 with XLR. Now, for the record, as far as the simple dongle into my iPhone 13 Pro is concerned, the HD600s are capable of reaching sufficient volumes. I run them at around 12 to 14 out of 16 when I use them. They won't sound quite as good as running them straight out of a dedicated amp, but I still enjoy them like this when push comes to shove. As for the R70Xs, these are some very power-hungry headphones. Despite that, I am able to run them at about 13 out of 16 the same way. That being said, they still won't be as detailed as running them off of amp, but I mostly heard the upper end suffer the most. It can get a bit buried and lack that power to step up a bit. Now, let's get to the sound. So for the record, all testing will be done with stock sounds. No EQ will be added to these particular tests. And we'll discuss some of that in the notes and observations portion as we dig in a little deeper. So let's start off with the bass category. The mid bass on the R70Xs is a tad meatier, but just a smidge. However, they definitely sound a bit flatter across the board, while the HD600s have a bit of a hump at the low end, while everything else just takes a step back. Now, the R70Xs do have a slightly deeper sub bass. In Zealots of Stockholm, they almost sound exactly the same. On that descending and ascending note at 305, you can hear a bit more of a rumble on the R70Xs for just a split second longer. Bass guitars are a bit tubbier on the R70Xs than on the HD600s, but you could also argue that they sound a bit fuller. On the bass drop in Get Lucky by Daft Punk featuring Pharrell Williams, at the 15-second mark, the R70Xs keep that presence closer to being flat across the board, while the HD600s can kind of drop it a little bit. Now, drums on the R70Xs sound fuller as well. Now, I actually prefer the timbre here because drums come across with a little more body, a little more echo to them. Electronic bass, same ordeal. The R70Xs simply have the slightly deeper sub-bass extension, and this definitely comes across in genres, say, like EDM. So overall, I am going to have to give the bass category to the R70Xs. They're just slightly more proficient drivers when it comes to reaching the lowest of notes and sounding clean and clear with them. It really shows the true capability of these drivers, especially at their price point. For dynamic drivers. As for the mids, right off the bat, the HD600 present a much more open sounding stage, which allow the mids to breathe and really stand apart from the rest of the instruments. Now, this isn't to say that the R70Xs aren't close, right? They definitely are, but they do sound a little more claustrophobic by comparison. I will say, however, I do prefer the timbre of the mids on the R70Xs. The cellos sound a bit more lifelike and full compared to the more thin and nasal sound on the HD600s. Vocals are undoubtedly more forward and clear on the HD600. I mean, these were designed with the intention of breaking away from absolute neutral a bit and bringing out those mids. That's definitely the specialty of these. Now, as for the high end, the treble, the R70Xs definitely bring out the cymbals and hi-hats a little more forward than the HD600s do in certain tracks. They're about the same level of intensity, but they also take a little step in front of everything else. It can be a bit of a coin flip though. Sometimes the HD600s bring them out a little more. Now, that consonant region, that pesky consonant region, let's talk about the sibilants here. The HD600s are what I consider to be slightly sharper in this frequency range. However, I should be clear. Neither of these ever get to a point of ever sounding sibilant. The HD600 just happen to be a bit more silvery in this regard. And with just about the rest of the frequency spectrum, the HD600s bring more to the forefront than the R70Xs. HD600s just give the sound a bit more life to the high end, while the R70Xs kind of bury the excitement a bit, kind of keep it profesh, very suit and tie, all while keeping the details. So let's discuss the soundstage and the imaging here. Right off the bat, I want to start off by saying that neither one of these are wide-sounding headphones in any way. They're definitely on the narrow side of things. I will say the R70Xs are the slightly wider of the two here, but just a smidge. That said, due to the shape of the cups, the HD600 do possess a taller soundstage, which definitely can be perceived as having a bit more grandeur to it. As for imaging, I'll be frank, the R70Xs do take the cake on this one. I was honestly surprised at how well these executed this, despite the very diminutive space they are working with. I did mention the food on a plate analogy in the previous video, the individual reviews of the R70Xs. More info on that, check that out below in the description, but I won't say they will absolutely blow the HD600s out of the water, but it is noticeable in this regard. Now let's get to some notes and observations. I'll show my EQ settings for the R70Xs here. Check out a more detailed description of why I chose those settings in the individual review. Again, link down below. What I will say here is that the R70Xs are a bit more responsive to EQ than the HD600s are. Not that I really need to change anything on the HD600s, but I just wish I could add just a little bit of sub bass to them, make that rumble a little rumbly without dirtying the rest of the frequency, especially in the low end. So let's go ahead and jump into the conclusion. I'll be right upfront and honest with these. If you came here looking for the absolute neutrality, the headphone that's going to make your playback sound as flat and even sounding as possible, look no further. The R70X are your guy. If, however, you're kind of seeking a balance between neutrality and a little bit of fun, just add a bit of touch of excitement to your listening experience, I still believe the HD600s are your guy. If a warmer, meatier low end that won't muddy the rest of the signature is your objective here, the R70Xs will be your king. But if you're looking for more present vocals and high end with some great timbre in the bass, but not necessarily the most body or presence here, the HD600s will be the one for you. Now, me personally, I'm still taking the HD600s. I'm a shill, blah, blah, blah. I get it, right? What can I say? I really enjoy the signature of these, and I've grown quite fond of them throughout the years. But that's gonna do it for me. I want to thank you very much for taking the time to watch this. I hope it helped you out in some way, shape, or form. And until then, I will see you in the next video. Okay, ciao. That doesn't really work well on camera, does it?